House of the Dragon Season 4. The ending nobody is ready for. Set 1. The war has already been lost. What if the biggest twist in House of the Dragon Season 4 isn't who wins the war? What if the real twist is that nobody actually wins? For 3 seasons, we've been watching one question dominate everything. Who deserves the Iron Throne? Rhaenyra believes it belongs to her. Aegon believes he has the right to sit on it. Their supporters are willing to kill for them. Their families are willing to destroy each other for them. And the dragons have turned that political argument into a war. But there's something very important about the way this story is moving toward its ending. The closer we get to the end, the less this feels like a story about winning. It feels like a story about surviving. And those are two completely different things. Because when the Dance of the Dragons finally reaches its final stage, almost everyone who started this conflict has already paid an unimaginable price. Dragons have died. Armies have been destroyed. Great houses have been divided. Cities have suffered. And ordinary people have been forced to live with the consequences of decisions they never made. So when Season 4 begins moving toward its conclusion, I don't think the biggest question will be which side has more power. The bigger question will be, how much power is even left? Think about what war does when it continues for too long. At the beginning, people believe victory is possible. They believe one major battle will change everything. Then another battle happens. And another. And another. Eventually, people stop believing in victory. They just want the killing to stop. That is the atmosphere I think House of the Dragon is going to lean into during its final stretch. The war has become too expensive, too destructive, too personal. And eventually, even the people fighting it have to realize that there may be nothing left worth saving. At the damaged cities, look at the dragons that remain. Look at the characters who survived while everyone around them disappeared. Because those details may tell us more about the ending than any battle ever could. And if the series commits to the idea that the dance ends through exhaustion rather than triumph, it could be one of the most mature endings this story could possibly deliver. Not a hero standing over a defeated enemy. Not a queen celebrating victory. Not a king enjoying his crown. Just a broken kingdom. And a new generation forced to live with the consequences. That is the real ending. The war ends. But the damage doesn't. And maybe that's exactly why the ending will hurt so much. Because in the end, nobody gets the future they imagined. Rhaenyra doesn't. Aegon doesn't. The people don't. And perhaps the only thing everyone finally agrees on is that the war should never have happened. So what do you think? Will House of the Dragon give Rhaenyra the devastating ending we've been expecting? Could the show change the location or circumstances of her final moments? Will Aegon's return actually feel like a victory? Or will Season 4 reveal that the true winner of the Dance of the Dragons is simply the person who survives it? Let me know your theory in the comments. Because if this story follows the darkest path possible, the final season won't be remembered because of who won. It will be remembered because of how completely everyone lost. And that may be the most brutal ending House of the Dragon could give us. That's why I think the ending could be much quieter than fans expect. We've become used to House of the Dragon delivering shocking moments through dragons, executions, betrayals, and battles. But the final chapters may not need another massive spectacle. The real horror could come from watching a kingdom simply collapse under the weight of everything that has happened. And nobody will be able to stop it. Look at the Riverlands. They've already become one of the clearest examples of what this war actually means for ordinary people. The armies come through. They fight. They leave. And the people who live there are left behind. Their homes are damaged. Their families are broken. Their fields are destroyed. And none of them gets to decide who sits on the Iron Throne. At some point, why would they care? If you're starving, does it really matter whether Rhaenyra or Aegon calls themselves king or queen? If your family is dead, does a royal proclamation bring them back? If your home has been burned, does another speech about succession make your life better? This is where the political conflict starts turning into something much darker. The people begin realizing that the rulers are fighting for power while everyone else is paying the bill. And once ordinary people reach that conclusion, a throne becomes incredibly fragile. Because a ruler doesn't control a kingdom simply because they wear a crown. They control it because enough people believe that crown has authority. Take that belief away, and the entire system starts falling apart. This is why King's Landing becomes so important. I don't think King's Landing needs to be conquered in the traditional sense. The city may already be defeated from the inside. The small folk have suffered hunger. They've watched the royal family fight while their own lives become harder. They've watched dragons destroy things that ordinary people could never hope to replace. VE watched powerful people demand loyalty without giving them security. And eventually, fear can turn into anger. That anger can turn into rebellion. And rebellion can destroy a government faster than any invading army. This is also where Rhaenyra becomes an extremely interesting piece of the story. Her influence isn't the same as the power of a dragon. She doesn't need one. She operates through information, through whispers, through fear, through the ability to make people question what they believe. And in a city already filled with desperation, that's incredibly powerful. You don't need to convince everyone to support your side. You only need to convince enough people that the current side has failed. Once people stop believing in their ruler, the ruler can become powerless almost overnight. And that brings us to Aegon's possible return. This is one of the moments I think could be very different emotionally from what many viewers expect. Imagine Aegon returning to King's Landing. You might expect a victorious king, a crown, a celebration, people cheering. But what if that's not what happens? What if he returns to a city that isn't really loyal to him? What if people aren't celebrating Aegon because they love him? What if they're simply exhausted? What if they're looking for anyone who can bring the war to an end? That's a much darker kind of victory. Because Aegon could technically regain the throne while gaining almost nothing emotionally. He would be returning to a kingdom that has already been damaged beyond recognition. And the same thing applies to Rhaenyra. She may still believe that she is fighting for her rightful place. But the longer the war continues, the more isolated she becomes. People die, UST becomes harder to find. And eventually, the queen who once believed she had a cause worth fighting for may discover that she is almost completely alone. That's the tragedy. Loses because everything around her collapses. Her supporters become exhausted. Her enemies become more determined. Her city becomes unstable. And the people she thought were fighting for her begin fighting for themselves. That creates a completely different kind of tension. We're no longer watching a queen trying to win a war. We're watching a woman realizing that the war has already taken almost everything from her. And that is where the story becomes deeply personal. Because Rhaenyra has spent years believing that the Iron Throne is her destiny. She was named heir. She was told that the succession belonged to her. She was forced to defend that claim. And every time someone challenged it, the stakes became higher. But the more she fights for the throne, the more the throne takes from her. Her family, her children, her allies, her peace, her ability to trust, and perhaps eventually, her life. This is why I think her final storyline could become the emotional center of Season 4. Because the ending isn't simply about whether Rhaenyra dies. We already know that her story eventually reaches that point in the source material. The bigger question is how the show chooses to make that moment feel. And this is where one theory becomes incredibly interesting. The Iron Throne itself. Think about the symbolism. Rhaenyra's entire story has been connected to that throne. It's the thing she was promised. It's the thing she was denied. It's the thing she fought a war to reclaim. So what would happen if her final moments brought her close to it? Not somewhere far away, not in a random location, but close enough to see the thing she spent her entire life trying to possess. That would transform her death into the final statement of her entire character arc. She could be standing within reach of victory and still lose. That's brutal. But it's also exactly the kind of storytelling House of the Dragon has been building toward. This series has never really been about heroes getting rewarded. It has been about people believing they can control power, only to discover that power controls them. And the Iron Throne may be the ultimate symbol of that idea. Everyone wants it. Everyone kills for it. Everyone sacrifices for it. And almost everyone who gets close to it is destroyed. That is why I don't think the final season needs to end with one giant battle and a simple winner. The story is much more tragic than that. The throne survives. The people fighting over it don't. And that may be the real ending. But there's still one enormous question. If Rhaenyra loses, does Aegon actually win? And that's where the story gets even darker. Because Aegon's victory may be the most meaningless victory of the entire dance. He can regain the throne. He can wear the crown. He can return to King's Landing. He can technically defeat his greatest rival. But by then, what exactly is left? The kingdom is broken. The dragons are disappearing. The people are exhausted. And Aegon himself has already been physically and emotionally destroyed by the war. So perhaps the final twist isn't that one side wins. Perhaps it's that both sides lose. And if that's where this story is heading, then House of the Dragon may deliver an ending far more brutal than another dragon battle. Because sometimes the most devastating ending isn't watching someone lose. It's watching someone win, and realizing the victory means absolutely nothing. And that's exactly where the story becomes even more disturbing. Because Rhaenyra's fall may only be the beginning. Aegon's victory may be temporary, and the throne may soon belong to someone who never truly wanted the war in the first place. But before we get there, we need to understand what happens to the two people at the center of this entire disaster. Rhaenyra, Aegon, and the meaningless victory. So if Rhaenyra's final moments represent the destruction of everything she spent her life fighting for, what does Aegon's victory represent? This is where the story becomes almost cruelly ironic. Because Aegon can get exactly what he wants. The throne, the crown, King's Landing, the title, the recognition, and yet, he still doesn't get a happy ending. In fact, his victory may be one of the most miserable victories in the entire story. By this stage, Aegon isn't the same person we met at the beginning. The war has changed him. His body has suffered. His confidence has been destroyed. His relationships have been damaged. And his kingdom has become almost unrecognizable. So imagine finally sitting on the throne you've spent so long fighting for, and realizing that there is nothing left to celebrate. That's the kind of irony this story is built around. Aegon doesn't inherit a peaceful kingdom. He inherits the ruins of a war. And that matters because it destroys the idea that the dance was ever really about winning. The war was presented as a struggle over who deserved to rule. But by the end, both claimants have been consumed by the struggle itself. Rhaenyra loses almost everything. Aegon survives long enough to claim the throne again, but he doesn't get to enjoy the victory. His reign becomes another chapter of pain, suspicion, and betrayal. And eventually, he dies too. Think about how devastating that is. Two people, two competing claims, two sides of a civil war, thousands of deaths, dragons destroyed, cities damaged, families torn apart. And after all of that, both central claimants end up dead. What was the point? That question is what makes the ending so powerful. Because House of the Dragon doesn't necessarily need to tell us who was morally right. That even when someone is technically right, the victory can still destroy them. That's the tragedy of Rhaenyra. And it's also the tragedy of Aegon. Neither of them escapes the machine they helped create. But there's another character who becomes incredibly important once the two sides begin collapsing. Larys Strong. Throughout the war, Larys has always understood something that many of the other characters don't. Power doesn't belong to the person shouting the loudest. Power belongs to the person who survives. He doesn't need to be the king. He doesn't need to be the queen. He doesn't need to command a dragon. He simply needs to remain useful. And that's why characters like Larys are so dangerous during the final stage of a war. While everyone else is choosing sides, he keeps calculating. While everyone else is losing family, he is gathering information. While everyone else is trying to win, he is trying to survive. And that makes him the perfect representation of the aftermath. Because when the great players are gone, people like Larys can still be standing. That's one of the darkest lessons of political stories like this. The people who start wars aren't always the people who pay the final price. Sometimes the survivors are the people who knew exactly when to stop caring about loyalty. And that's why the final chapters could feel so different. The great dragons may disappear. The major armies may collapse. The famous leaders may die. But the political game continues. Someone always survives. Someone always whispers. Someone always benefits. And somewhere in the shadows, people are already planning what comes next. That's why I don't think the ending should be viewed simply as Rhaenyra versus Aegon. The real ending is what happens to Westeros after both of them are gone. Because that's when the kingdom finally has to confront the cost of everything. Imagine what that world looks like. The major houses have lost countless people. The people are exhausted. And the Iron Throne is still sitting there, waiting for another ruler. That's the most disturbing image of all. After everything, the throne is still there, waiting for another person to believe they can control it. And that is why the eventual rise of the next generation becomes so important. Because the war destroys the people who fought it. But the kingdom still has to continue. Someone has to rule. Someone has to rebuild. Someone has to live with the consequences. And that is where the ending becomes almost bittersweet. The Dance of the Dragons isn't really a story about one family destroying another. It's about a generation destroying itself and leaving the next generation to clean up the mess. That's why the final moments could be much quieter than the battles that came before them. Instead of another giant dragon flying across the sky, we could get silence. Instead of thousands of soldiers charging, we could see an empty battlefield. Instead of cheering crowds, we could see ordinary people trying to rebuild their lives. And that contrast would make the ending hit even harder. Because after all the screaming, silence becomes powerful. After all the fire, ashes remain. And after all the arguments about who deserves the throne, someone has to sit on it. But the person who inherits the kingdom won't inherit the glory everyone imagined. They inherit the damage. That is what makes this story so tragic. The people fighting for the future never get to enjoy it. The people who survive have to live with what those fighters did. And perhaps that is the final message of House of the Dragon. Power doesn't make people immortal. It doesn't protect families. It doesn't guarantee loyalty. And it certainly doesn't guarantee happiness. The Iron Throne doesn't reward the strongest person, then realizing that she will never truly have it. That is not just death. That is the destruction of an entire dream. And the cruelest part is that she may understand it before everyone else does. She may finally see that the war has taken more than it could ever give back. Her family is gone. Her supporters are gone. Her city has turned against her. Her enemies are closing in. And the throne is still there. Silent, waiting, almost mocking her. That would make her final scene unforgettable, not because of how violent it is, but because of what it means. The woman who spent her life trying to claim the throne dies without truly possessing it. And then Aegon gets it, only to discover that he cannot hold on to it either. That creates a perfect circle. Rhaenyra loses the throne. Aegon wins the throne. Aegon loses the throne. And eventually, someone else inherits the kingdom. So after all that bloodshed, the throne changes hands again. That's why I believe the ending shouldn't be judged by who wins. It should be judged by what the war destroys and what it leaves behind. Because the greatest tragedy isn't that Rhaenyra dies. It isn't even that Aegon dies. The greatest tragedy is that thousands of people die believing their sacrifices will create a better future, only for the survivors to inherit a broken kingdom. That's the part that stays with you. The dragons were supposed to represent power, but by the end, they become symbols of how quickly power disappears. The throne was supposed to represent stability, but it becomes a symbol of chaos. The royal family was supposed to represent the strength of the realm, but it becomes the reason the realm tears itself apart. And the war that was supposed to decide who should rule may ultimately prove that neither side deserved the price they demanded. So when Season 4 reaches its final moments, don't just look for the biggest explosion. Look for the smallest details.